So most importantly, hello. Hello. So it's great to be here at this gathering of this kind of community, working and thinking about civic tech from all kinds of angles and from all over the world. I work for an organization called TechSoup. I have been working in this area for 18 years, which makes me both old in this industry and old in real life. And as part of the work that I do at TechSoup, so TechSoup is, I must have written that line in the bio 10 years ago, because TechSoup is a 37-year-old nonprofit organization that helps civil society groups around the world be able to connect to technology so that they can improve and optimize their own systems. As a part of that, about 5.5 years ago, we started a group called Caravan Studios. And Caravan Studios is a group of 7 people that works with those same civil society organizations, so NGOs, libraries, informal associations, church groups, to bring people together and build technology that makes a difference to them and the issues that they care about. So many of the same kinds of things that we're talking about here, right? What we see in the United States and other countries is that in many instances, civil society organizations are the agents by which governments offer their services, right? The money that governments grant goes to organizations to help provide food for people, education, and shelter. And so we're super interested in how we make issue-facing technology that helps those organizations be able to better deliver those services in a faster and more efficient way. And doing that work, we've built the kinds of projects that you see represented on the bottom of this screen, from the Safe Shelter Collaborative that helps connect organizations serving the needs of domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, so they can find whether or not shelter is available within 6 minutes instead of 3 days, which it was in the United States. And if that shelter is not available, provide opportunities to people like all of us in the room to be able to pay for a hotel room for the person in need. So we can use our willingness, a little bit of the extra money that may be in our wallets, and empty hotel space to augment what is in the United States an absolutely pitiful shelter system for domestic violence and human trafficking survivors. Along the way, that project collects a lot of data. We see a lot of information about people whose needs aren't getting met the first time they ask. If I walk into a shelter and that shelter has space for me, it doesn't go into the system that we've built. But if they don't have space for me, then we learn about it. And what that means is, in one large American metro area in the US state of Texas, we're starting to believe that there could be sufficient need to support a men's-only domestic violence shelter. Something that people in Texas wouldn't naturally speak. And when we talk about domestic violence, we're often talking about men to women, not male-on-male domestic violence, not domestic violence that you might have towards siblings or elderly parents, which counts, right? It's in the same household. So we are starting to learn those kinds of things. We also do projects that rely on government data. Range is a very simple product that shows the nearest place a US school kid can get a free lunch during the summers. In the United States, millions of children eat because they go to school, right? They get a free lunch whenever they are at school, and often free breakfast, and sometimes food to bring home for their families over the weekend. So when US schools shut down for the summer, those kids, as it turns out, are still hungry. They don't like magically stop needing food for 3 months while they're out of school. And so, but now they have to find the food because it's not so easy. It's not at their school. It's at skate parks, it's at trailer parks, it's at libraries, it's at all kinds of places. So this is a super easy place of using US available data to make a product. And then in Brazil, we've been working on projects where we actually bring together community members, often at libraries, to say what issue they care about and then build the technology interventions that matter the most to them. And one of the things that we've been learning in that project is often the technology does already exist. Sometimes we find code that somebody has made locally that we're able to use or access. Sometimes we find projects that we can reference, And what's missing isn't the technology, or if it is, it's a super easy part of the problem. What's missing is the data needed to power the technology. And so we work with community members to actually organize that data. And that's most of what I want to talk about today, right? It's how can we connect with civil society organizations to support getting the data that's necessary for these tools to be meaningful, at least some of the tools to be meaningful. We use, when we go in and work with communities, we use a pretty standard design thinking style process. We're super informed by a Brazilian educator and the work that he did called the pedagogy of the oppressed, and a development technique called participatory action research, as well as design thinking resources that we're all probably pretty familiar with at this point. I often joke, actually, that we've trained U.S. woodland creatures to do the development, and that's our real special thing. So 3 years ago, if I'd gotten up to give this talk, when I talk about how we build technology, this was the picture I showed. This is of our team based in San Francisco. We mostly do sort of product management and QA and DevOps style work on our team. We contract out for some of the technology resources, but a lot of the tech was building. We were actually making the tech, right? Now, whenever I say build, I'm actually often looking at something like this. This is a teacher, a high school teacher in a city called Farroupilha, which is in the southernmost state of Brazil, and she's getting ready to board a bus, because in that community, they cared very much about where the buses were. So, working with a local, and they didn't, it's a city of like 70,000 people. One guy that worked for the bus company knew the bus routes. Nobody else knew all the bus routes. Not even the bus drivers knew all the bus routes. They knew what they were driving that day, which is called a paddle, as it turns out. But nobody had all of the bus routes mapped. They didn't have it on a paper map, and they certainly didn't have it in a digital form. So what we did is worked with local librarians, teachers, and students, and they rode the bus with either their mobile phones or a GPS device, and every time they passed a bus stop, they hit a button. And what that did was grab the GPS coordinates, but also the elapsed time between stops, so we were able to go back into the library and using the internet connection and the computers there, transform that into GTFS, the data required, right, to have bus routes available online. They uploaded it to OpenStreetMaps that same day, so they were able to see their bus routes in a digital format. We negotiated with a Canadian company that makes an app called Transit that can work any place you have the data to get their city's data represented in the app, and worked with the city government so that they could submit that data to Google so that it could also appear in Google Maps. Along the way, what happened is the city government learned about this data and that they should be asking the bus company to include this kind of data anytime they did a concession for bus companies. So this is an interesting, this was a super informative project for us in what it really took to get some of these projects going and to get the engagement of government, especially in mid-size and smaller cities, right? Where they don't have access always to the same kind of technology. And this city in Brazil, it doesn't get the kind of attention that Sao Paulo gets, or Rio gets, or even a city like Brasilia, right? And so this was an opportunity for them to understand how to participate in this kind of a movement and what the city government could do, but also what the citizens and civil society could do. So this is one example. Increasingly what we're finding is build means this, right? It means working with local residents to make the data robust and available. So what I want to talk about is what civil society organizations can do to support this, because I think often we started off thinking of it as in a very limited way. At a conference I was at about 2 weeks ago, they talked about civil society engagement in a really limited way. It was mostly about ticking the box of training citizens about data and open data and the tools that were available and what they could do. So it was that, or some other engagement. Like, oh, look, we had robust engagement because at some point we talked to a civil society organization. And I think that's a minimum of what we can be doing to be engaging with civil society organizations. So one, I think they can use and support access to official data. I think this is particularly true of libraries. Libraries are a robust network of free and open co-working spaces, right? Libraries are one of the few places worldwide that we can walk into without taking our wallet out of our pocket or doing any of those other things. And so they're a place where we can work to make sure citizens have ongoing access to data. And for us, they've been a huge part of our project sustainability because librarians are information professionals. So they're very happy to curate and support the use of data. Whoops. Then they can also enhance, sorry, I jumped up there. They can also enhance available data. So enhance available data. So the kind of air quality projects that were described just a bit ago, we've seen organizations in Colombia working to put air quality sensors on libraries in Medellin. And this is really great because it allows local residents to have a real connection to the data. They can see the sensor, it's small, it's touchable, they can install it, they can connect it, and they can see the data in real time. So that ability to take the government data, you know, the official air quality sensor is about the size of this stage. It's covered with a wire net. People don't have a connection to it. You know, it would be very hard to get at or see the data that it produces because it produces it in a super sophisticated format. So this gave them a lot more local points of data and gave the residents a much bigger connection to it. Civil society organizations also produce tremendous amounts of data. They do it in the way that I described earlier with our own Safe Shelter Collaborative project. And I think we shy away from the data that they produce because it's either in a qualitative and narrative format, and it's hard to turn that into machine-readable data. And it's in, you know, Excel spreadsheets and rows. It's not huge amounts of data, but I think we have to do the hard work of helping turn the data that civil society organizations have into part of how we see the communities that we work with and how we understand the communities that we work with. Because like in the project that I described earlier, often what civil society organizations know is they know a tremendous amount about the people whose needs aren't getting met by government or business. That's who they help. And in many countries, civil society organizations are how some of our most vulnerable citizens access the benefits of having a democratic government. They can also support a broader interrogation of data. And one of our colleagues in Brazil, working in the Brazilian state of Pará, was doing a project where they were putting all the data about where public libraries were into Ushahidi. And what they discovered was citizens didn't trust the government-produced data. That data was available, but they didn't believe it. They didn't think that it had been maintained. They thought that it might be impacted by corruption, right? Somebody saying the library is there. The Ministry of Culture is continuing to give them money, but there's no library there. Or it doesn't have the resources or services that they're claiming it has, right? That kind of corruption. And so they worked with research volunteers that went throughout the state, knocking on the doors of all the libraries to validate that there really was a library there, what really was available at that library, and what its hours really were. They did some corrections, right? Because sometimes the address was an administrative office, not the actual library. Sometimes the library had closed. But sort of more important, they were actually able to engage citizens so that they trusted the data, because they weren't going to trust any tool that got made if they didn't trust the data in that tool. And so this was a first step of engaging them with government data, was very much around trust. And that's just one example of the way I think civil society can support interrogating the data. They can also create and share meaning. I mean, giving them access to data, access to tools is an enormous opportunity for civil society organizations to bring in their constituents and say, is this right? Because that's an important part of any participatory process. You don't just do it at the front end when you're making whatever it is you're making. You also do it at the end when you think you understand how your tool is working, so that you can understand if it's really having the impact you believe it to have on the communities that you're trying to serve, and whether or not those individuals value that impact. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event that included executive director of a museum in the U.S. state of California was talking. Nina Simon is the executive director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. And she was talking about a project they were doing to make the Art and History Museum more inclusive. And she said the question that she felt that organizations had to ask themselves when they thought about the inclusivity of their projects and the viewpoint it's representing was how much they were willing to change to be inclusive. And that question has really stuck with me, right? As we develop technology that helps us make meaning out of the world, that helps connect us to data that's being produced by governments or others, how are we including not just civil society organizations themselves, but more importantly, all of the people that they serve in looking at those tools, and how much are we willing to change to do the hard work of including those folks? It's a question we're asking ourselves on our own team, and I don't know that we have a good answer yet because it's scary to give up so much control. But I think that we have to do it because governments are this enormous resource that can benefit us and provide a social safety net. But civil society organizations are the way that that social safety net gets accessed by so many people that we have to really work to figure out what we're willing to do to include them and the folks we serve. Thanks.